Hi, I'm TP McAtamney, author of the book My Waffles Are Cold, A Man's Guide to Abusive Women, and also of the new book, Mac's Guide to Coping with Stress, Anxiety, and Fear, both available on Amazon. Today's subject is going to talk about rebounding relationships, specifically those out of an abusive relationship. With relationships, it's a natural thing to be bonded with the person that you were with, and after a relationship is over, there's a lot of pain, a lot of loneliness, and a desire to get back out sometimes and try again. With an abusive relationship, you have bonding that takes place, but it's a negative type of bonding, and what is referred to sometimes as trauma bonding. Trauma bonding, to simplify it, is simply you get bonded to what is both called positive and negative reinforcement of the abuser. In other words, when they feel you've done right by them, they positively reinforce their approval of you. And opposite to that, if you displease them in any way, generally that's what happens more than anything else, it's a negative type of bonding. And they play this game back and forth, but never let you get too low until they're getting ready to get rid of you. To the point where they can bring you back with a little positive reinforcement. This way they keep you on a kind of a yo-yo. There's a lot of stress and there's a lot of pain and things that go along with this type of relationship, and a lot of chaos. What happens though after a relationship is over and all this chaos ends and all of this positive negative reinforcement ends, and generally people can become bored. It sounds like that's not what you'd want to hear, but they generally become bored with life. It's kind of like combat soldiers. Once they come back from combat, and they could be suffering all kinds of problems like post-traumatic stress, they generally find life here back in the States or back away from the combat as boring, because they've gotten used to the adrenaline rush of the combat situation that they're in. They may not have liked it, but they got used to the rush of the adrenaline, which is part of the stress response one has when they're in a high stress situation, such as combat or an abusive relationship or anything that commits them to high stress over a period of time. And it takes the body a while to adjust to this. It takes the body a while to adjust to just being normal. And a lot of people, when they come out of an abusive relationship, don't even know what normal is. They come out of the relationship. Perhaps they were discarded, which is abrupt, or maybe they've planned it. The victim plans it after learning a little bit of what they're in, just says, I've got to go. In any case, once they leave, it's like, what do I do now? And it's not always apparent what they should do now. If they're seeing a therapist or somebody like that, they'll get suggestions. But again, life becomes a little bit more sedate and boring after that. They really don't know what to do to get that high back. It's kind of like they get used to the stress. So what will happen is sometimes they'll approach somebody else and start a relationship without realizing the other person they may be getting in a relationship may also be an abuser. Remember, abusers, as I've said in some of my other videos, look for weak points in a person. And when they initially meet somebody, they will look for the weaknesses through what I call the interview. And let's say you're on a date, you've just got an abusive relationship, and you haven't quite healed. Well, if you remember your experience of getting out of an abusive relationship, if that's what's happened to you, you remember how you used to verbalize that to a lot of different people. I found myself talking to all kinds of people when I got out, which is why I'd suggest therapy, because then I found a central point where I could voice this pain to. Otherwise, you're out sharing it with just about anybody on a bus, the person at the supermarket, anybody that gives you an opening, you generally jump in and start talking about it. So it's very important, once you get out of an abusive relationship, to understand that the chaos that you were in, the high stress situation, the adrenaline that was high adrenaline situation is going to take a time. There's going to be a transition period, and it's going to take time for that to calm down. Basically calm down from it and learn what normal is again. Learn what a normal life is all about. Because you risk, if you don't do that, then you risk the chance that you're going to get into just another abusive relationship, because they can use the same tools on you and yet you can still be fooled. You can still be fooled. It takes, like I said, when you get out of these relationships, you have to learn about all of the games and the mind games that they played on you, your abuser played on you. And these things take time to weed through and get, out of your system before you go back out there basically with half a shield against another type of abuse coming at you and being taken advantage of again. And I know people that have done this. They've gone from a narcissistic relationship to a borderline relationship, or a narcissistic or a borderline relationship to a psychopath relationship. And if you ever heard somebody say, why do I always attract the crazies? And a lot of people I've heard say that, it's because they never quite go from one to the next, in a transition without, screening that new person to make sure that they're not one of those crazies. And again, addicted to that adrenaline rush, subconsciously, they're looking for that, which sounds weird and kind of sick, but that's generally what you are when you come out of an abusive relationship. You're emotionally and mentally and psychologically weakened or damaged, if you want to call that, to the point where you're not ready for another relationship. Doesn't matter how lonely you get. And there's all kinds of ways that you can fulfill that need without getting into another relationship. For instance, a lot of times people come out of an emotional relationship, and because of the trust issues they've developed and other issues they developed, they stay in the house, or they stay to themselves because maybe the abuser didn't let them go out and make friends, but didn't let them out of the house. And I always tell them, why don't you just get out? That's what was told to me. Just get out of the house. Where? Anywhere. Go to the mall, walk around, have a cup of coffee, spend some money on yourself. You're probably not able to do that with the abuser. Go to the beach, do anything. Don't go there for the purpose of getting into a relationship necessarily, but go there to find yourself. Experience life apart from any type of relationship. At the same time you're doing this, you work on yourself through a therapist or through self-study. I always suggest a therapist rather than self-study. We have a tendency to delude ourselves and lie to ourselves sometimes. And as time goes on, no matter how horrific the situation is, our minds have a tendency to go back and only look at the good times and hide the bad times. In other words, cover them up in our minds because they were too horrific to imagine at this point way down the road. So you need to deal with those and understand those, be honest with yourself, and come to grips with them and say, this happened, it'll never happen again, and now I'm going to spend a little time with myself. And if that turns out to be a month, 2 months, a year, I always suggest, and it's been suggested in treatment programs, that after getting out of your substance abuse, and many times, it's like I say, in my book, the abusive relationship is the same withdrawals come from that person because of that trauma bonding as come out of quitting any kind of drug. The drug wasn't good for you, but the fact is that you became addicted to the high of the chaos. So, you don't go into a relationship for the first year. If it's, a lot of times it can be done. It just can be done. You just spend a year with yourself, discovering yourself, learning what you like instead of what somebody else likes, doing what you want to do instead of what somebody else wants to do all the time. And then once you have gotten to that point, you're better able to, and fully equipped with more knowledge, you're better able to pick people out and interview them when you go to another relationship. That's okay. You know how to go in a relationship, you know what to look for, you know what the red flags are, and you go in there and just, have a date with somebody. And if you see any kind of red flag, you just say, okay, this was great, that'll be the only time we do it, but this has been great, and then move on. Instead of jumping on the first one just because you feel lonely, just because you feel hurt, just because of many other reasons that people get into rebound relationships. And then, like I said before, take the time to do it right. You've already been through the worst relationship you could possibly been through. There's no hurry to get into another one. Do it right. If you really want to do that. A lot of people get out of these relationships and don't want to get into any relationship for a while. That's fine. You don't have to wait a year. That's fine. It depends on you, but it depends on the fact that whether or not you have learned what you've been through and know how to recognize the signs of any new potential mate that you run across, so that you don't end up in the same mess all over again. And I'm TP McAtamney, author of the book My Waffles Are Cold, A Man's Guide to Abusive Women. Thanks for listening in. I'll see you next time.